Okay, I think we're all here and we can get started. I realize this is the last day, and mentally, some of you are out of here already. But as I said, let's have a final session on Antony and Cleopatra, though if it spills over into the next section, that's no problem. But I'd like to leave the last session wide open to questions about anything in the plays, Shakespeare in general, whatever has left you puzzled after this week. So, we were talking about the universal at the end of last class, and the word actually comes up in the play at 2 points in ways that suggest that we have achieved the universal in this play. If you turn to page 92, Phidias makes the offer to Cleopatra, about line 72, to come over to Octavius, who is now the universal landlord. There's the word universal. And yet, as I suggest, there's a nice little tension between the word universal, and the word landlord. Universal sounds great and impressive and magnificent. And the suggestion is he's universal only because he's a landlord. There's something almost bourgeois about Octavius. He's the universal administrator. And by the way, I did wonder if landlord had the connotations in Shakespeare's day that it does now, namely of a guy you send the rent checks to. And yes, it did. I wondered if landlord, was a big deal. But in Richard II, when John of Gaunt is complaining about what Richard II is doing and farming out taxes to nobles, he says you're just a landlord. So it obviously had negative connotations. The other place is page 106. The really important line in scene 6, line 5, when Caesar says the time of universal peace is near. So there is some suggestion that we're at the point of the emergence of the universal, that Rome has made the world into a single whole. And yet there's something ominous about those words. It sounds great, the time of universal peace is near, but not for a community that's based itself on war for 5 centuries. We talked about this, how much the Republic was oriented towards war, and in some ways we are seeing the problem of universal peace in this play. Just to add one more on page 98, at the bottom, Caesar says, "Know that tomorrow, the last of many battles, we mean to fight." There is a suggestion of achieving a universal community in this play, and yet at the same time, doubts about what that will mean. There's a strong sense of idleness in this play, or of lack of purpose, or people wondering what's left to do. And when for 5 centuries what the Romans have been doing is fighting battles, it sounds great to have the last of them, but maybe it's ominous. And so universal is not necessarily a good thing. And indeed, when we juxtapose Antony and Cleopatra with Coriolanus, we raise the issue of how viable is a universal community. In a way, I think these plays are Shakespeare's attempt to explore that question. For one thing, to look at Apollos, which he had not done in any of his other plays. I don't think his plays about Athens, for example, are really about the historical Athens in the ways that these plays are about the historical Rome. I think Shakespeare wanted to examine, well, what is it like to live in Apollos? Now, Rome as an empire offers all these new opportunities, and we saw that last time. But the question is, has it now cut off some of the older opportunities? And indeed, we see it is very tough to be an old-style Roman in the world of this play. Those who are the carryovers, the leftovers from the Republic, have a really hard time maintaining their balance, maintaining their integrity as Romans. And indeed, the characters who try to stand up for the old Rome, like Pompey when he speaks of its old Republican values, they turn out to be pretty hollow pretty fast. And so the question would be, is this a false universal? By claiming to be universal, it claims to enclose and incorporate everything. Maybe, in fact, it still excludes things. And I think, again, Shakespeare did not live in the Roman Empire. He lived in a would-be empire. He was certainly confronted in his day with many empires, the Habsburg Empire, the Ottoman Empire. France wanted to be an empire. I think he understood empire as a modern way of life. And remember, there was still this institution, the Holy Roman Empire, in Shakespeare's day, and Henry VIII tried to become Holy Roman Emperor and lost out to a Habsburg. I think that was Charles V. And so he was, confronted with empire. In some ways, in this play, is confronting the alternative. We really see the difference between a small political community and a very, very large political community in these plays. And the largeness of the Roman Empire is emphasized, and we've seen many consequences that flow from its largeness. Coriolanus never got to meet an Egyptian, never got to meet anyone like Cleopatra. In some ways, that was lucky for him. And indeed, we see here, Romans are fascinated by Egyptian things and suffused by the Greek world, and they start to lose their Romanness in the process. There's something actually subversive about this world. It's a deeply cosmopolitan world. Again, the root of cosmopolitan is taking the cosmos for your polis, taking the whole world for your polis now, and it's no longer a polis in a way. Life is no longer focused as clearly on politics, and that's very good in some ways. We really, as I said, we start to see greater depth in the characters in Julius Caesar, and we really see emotional depth in the characters here. They go all weepy on us. I wonder, does anyone weep in Coriolanus? I'd have to go back and check that. We now have what amount to Shakespearean soliloquies and people contemplating the clouds and wondering about the afterlife. And in many ways, that's all very wonderful. On the other hand, it closes off certain other human possibilities. And let me provoke you into thinking about this by reminding you what Aristotle said. We always say man is a political animal, but what the Greek means is man is that animal whose nature it is to live in the polis. If Aristotle is right, and he often is, we all live in unnaturally large communities now. And that's what Aristotle would say if he looked at our world. He would say, this is ridiculous. These countries are too large now. The people can't know each other. And that was the nature of the polis, is what you could call 1 degree of separation. If you didn't know another person, you at least knew someone who knew him. We famously live with 6 degrees of separation. And Aristotle sees consequences flowing from that. And we really do see them in ancient Athens. You knew these guys you were voting for, sometimes too well. because it was a small community, 300,000 people. Now we have to turn on the TV and find out who they've been sexting, and discover who these guys really are. And you can say we're trying to make up for the size of our communities now with all these new modes of communication and so on. But Aristotle would say, do you really know them immediately, or is it still highly mediated by the media? And it's we have all come to accept the nation state as natural. We are naturalized to the nation state. All you guys think that the only form of political organization is the nation state. And Aristotle is a good reminder that someone once argued differently. And it's a big question, but you might look around to what extent your lives are still anchored in cities. Of the slightly larger than Aristotle's, but it's interesting to realize how much the unit of our political organization is still the city. I think there's a lot to be said for Aristotle's claim that human beings are meant by nature to live in cities. Anyway, I won't go into a whole rap on this subject, but it is in a way the question raised by these Roman plays. Can a community get too large? Now it does so for the reasons we get large now, namely security. The polis is a very threatened unit because of its size, and it confronts all these other polis. And here's Rome beaten every other city in the Mediterranean world, and it's now about to become safe. Safe by virtue of its size, part because it's defeated all its enemies and incorporated them, in part because now it's so large, who can defeat Rome? And your boundaries are so far extended that you got a lot of play there. But Shakespeare suggests you pay a price for that largeness. There's actually a joke in Aristotle's Politics, perhaps the only one, about Babylon, which was an empire. But Aristotle treats it as a city and shows its unnatural character by saying, Babylon was so large that when one part of the city fell, the other part didn't hear about it for 3 days. And that's about as funny as Aristotle gets. But that's the joke of a huge empire, that part of it could fall and take 3 days for the rest to know about it. Whereas Athens falls, everybody sees it. And of course that's true of the Roman Empire here. Now it's got messengers and things move pretty fast, but there is a sense in Antony and Cleopatra of how attenuated this community has become compared to the polis. And again, the polis, especially in Coriolanus, orients the citizens. It gives them landmarks. They are not at sea in the polis. But in Antony and Cleopatra, we see a world in which the characters are literally and figuratively at sea. And they're really bewildered by it. So much so that, say, if you look at page 55, the opening of Act 2, Scene 7, the imagery in the play is, now remember, this is the scene where the Romans are at sea. They're on a galley here, and their plants are ill-rooted already. The least wind in the world will blow them down. The world of Coriolanus is deeply rooted in the polis, and now we're in a world that's ill-rooted. And then there's a passage at the bottom of the page that I can't actually figure out what it means. The notes make a stab at it, but but anyway, to be called into a huge sphere and not to be seen to move in it. To me, that's an image of the whole of this Roman world. These people have been called into this huge sphere of the Roman Empire, and they're lost in it. It just Where do we go now? And we've seen that there's a pervasive sense in the play of not knowing what to do anymore. It was so easy when all you had to do was fight the Volskis. And you knew what your purpose was. And the characters in Coriolanus know what to do. They don't stand around wondering and questioning their way of life. Now, that's a defect in many ways. What we see is people have become increasingly thoughtful. You can say that they have the leisure to be thoughtful. They got a lot of leisure in this play. They got nothing but leisure. But at the same time, this I think is why Shakespeare is a great tragic author, that he realizes there are really difficult choices in human life, and that you choose one thing, you lose something else. And as I said, there's a kind of hypothetical imperative here. If you want a fully politicized community, well, live in a polis. Guess what? The polis produces political life. But if you want all these other things, poetry, drinking, erotic life, meditation, yeah, go live in an empire, but forget about being a Coriolanus type. And again, that's why I say he explores different regimes in his effort to consider the full range of human types. So let's now let's talk about religion in the play. And let me go back to the passage from Machiavelli I cleverly prefaced to our discussions on Monday. And this is again on page 131. This is Machiavelli's attempt to characterize the difference between pagan and Christian religion. Our religion has glorified humble and contemplative more than active men. It has then placed the highest good in humility, abjectness, and contempt of things human. The other, paganism, placed it in greatness of spirit, strength of body, and all other things capable of making man very strong. And if our religion asks that you have strength in yourself, it wishes you to be capable more of suffering than of doing something strong. This mode of life thus seems to have rendered the world weak and given it in prey to criminal men, who can manage it securely, seeing that the collectivity of men, so as to go to paradise, think more of enduring their beatings than of avenging them. And although the world appears to be made effeminate and heaven disarms, it arises without doubt more from the cowardice of the men who have interpreted our religion according to idleness and not according to virtue. That's pretty good characterization of the world of Antony and Cleopatra. It's pretty striking. I hope we can explore that today. But what I'm going to argue is that Shakespeare shows how Rome moved in a Christian direction before it even had Christianity. That a lot of the things that Machiavelli characterized as Christian are already happening. And I think Shakespeare associates it with the dissolution of the polis as Rome passes into Rome, as the city of Rome begins to dissolve into this vast cosmopolitan world. And we talked about changes in the definition of nobleness in this play, and there are a number of paradoxes that are pervasive in the play. Defeat becomes victory, death becomes life, and weakness becomes strength in this world. And I hope to trace that. So I want to talk about religion here, again, at first independent of Christianity, because a lot of things can happen. Let's turn to page 27, the opening of Act 2. This is a dialogue about the gods, which Shakespeare invented out of nothing. between Pompey and Menacratus, it begins, if the great gods be just, they shall assist the deeds of justice men. Know, worthy Pompey, that what they do delay, they not deny. Whilst we are suitors to their throne, decays the thing we sue for. We, ignorant of ourselves, beg often our own harms, which the wise powers deny us for our good, so find we profit by losing of our prayers. How does this differ from the attitude towards the gods in Republican Rome in Coriolanus? Yeah.
The gods are tied to the luck of the city, so winning your prayers if you are simply thinking about the good of the city is always going to benefit opposed to God, and there seems to be a greater distance between the God and the individual and the city here.
Yeah, yeah.
Intervention in the person's welfare of the individual, in that your prayers may not be answered because, in fact, the gods know better for you.
Yeah, it's really a much more confused relation to the gods. In Coriolanus, and again, remember, these two plays are being written at the same time. It's not like Shakespeare's view of religion has changed. He's trying to portray a change in religion. Coriolanus, the assumption is very clear-cut. The gods are on the side of Rome. And no one's going to convince you that a Volsci victory is good for you. That the gods would be being good to Rome if they let the Volscis win. Notice even the opening words, if the great gods be just. Now you can call that a rhetorical gesture that people often use, and yet, on the face of it, for the first time, someone's raised the question of the justice of the gods. Pompey isn't convinced that they're just. And indeed, what's going on here, really, it's reflecting a genuine doubt here. He can't understand why these triumvirs are doing so well and he's doing so bad. And indeed, at this point, it would be reasonable for a Roman to raise the question of the justice of the gods after he's seen one criminal action after another rewarded, including, for example, Julius Caesar celebrating a triumph over his fellow Roman Pompey. So the first question really is, are the gods just? Now, again, you can say this is something to be said for the Rome of the Empire, that people are raising this question. It's not the kind of question you stand around Republican Rome and saying, gee, I wonder if the gods are just. But okay, so he raised the question. And then Menacratus says to him, know, worthy Pompey, that what they do delay, they not deny. Now, that's reasonable. He's basically saying, give them some time. Just because they haven't done what looks just to you yet doesn't mean they're unjust. On the other hand, how long do you wait? Again, the gods are pretty clear-cut in Coriolanus. We're going into battle. The gods are on our side. If you lose the battle, they weren't on your side. But the hope is, you get a clear message. And Pompey points out, what kind of answer is this? While we are suitors to the throne, decays the thing we sue for. This is no good. There are many times in life when you can't wait. And then Menacratus complicates things even further by saying, well, we just don't know what is good anymore. And so maybe when the gods deny us, it's for our own good. And notice, so find we profit by losing of our prayers. Choice of loss. Remember from Ventidius, Brutus's, I shall have more glory by this losing day. I'm trying to show you how the philosophy of losing emerges in this empire. A good example of it is Enobarbus's line. Where he is talking about his Here's this, here's just another example. I just went by page 123. You can see Antony says, line 136, bid that welcome which comes to punish us, and we punish it, seeming to bear it lightly. There's the same philosophy that when you lose, you can be better off, and especially the idea bearing it, seeming to bear it lightly. That's exactly what Machiavelli says about bearing your punishments. Yeah, it's page 91 on Enobarbus. Mine honesty and I begin to square. The loyalty well held to fools does make our faith mere folly. Yet he that can endure to follow with allegiance a fallen lord does conquer him that did his master conquer, and earns a place in the story. That's Brutus's logic from the point of view of the follower. Brutus said, you do better by losing, because then you find out who's really loyal to you. And now Enobarbus is saying that from the point of view of the follower. That it seems crazy to follow a loser like Antony. Yet he that can endure to follow with allegiance a fallen lord does conquer him that did his master conquer. Notice another example of defeat is victory. Losing's better than winning here. Following a losing lord is better than following a winning lord. Again, that doesn't compute for Republican Romans. And the whole notion of a fallen lord, that your lord should now become a fallen lord. Now, what are some other changes, signs of changes in religion in this play? Yeah. Yeah, and the afterlife is portrayed in a very positive way here. As a good example on page 119, here virtually out of nowhere, line 50 on page 119, Antony says, where souls do couch on flowers, we'll hand in hand, and with our sprightly port make the ghost gaze. Dido and her Aeneas shall want troops, and all the haunts be ours. What's strange about what Antony claims here? Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is what's strange about it, but I think it's interesting that he's trying to use the promise of a paradise in the afterlife to mitigate the negative aspects of his current situation.
No kidding.
Well, this is all terrible right now, but hey, my girlfriend and I are going to be in paradise as soon as I kill myself. So on the one hand, we have these arguments against suicide to Satan that was bad. It's kind of an escapist fantasy.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the way the afterlife functions in Christianity. That is, it's a compensation. Yes?
Dido and Aeneas aren't together in paradise, but Dido doesn't talk to him in hell.
Yeah.
In the underworld.
She gives him the old cold soldier,
She's with her dad.
Zacchaeus. She's with her first husband. Now, this is very interesting because Shakespeare points to the need to rewrite the classical understanding of the afterlife. Because in Homer especially, but even in Virgil, the afterlife is not such an attractive place. It's a little spooky. And when Aeneas gets to go to the afterlife, of course he's still alive, but what it's not a nice experience for him, because the woman whom he drove to suicide gives him the cold shoulder, or the cold soldier, come to think of it, Zacchaeus. By the way, turn to page 173, where you can see Shakespeare's source here. It's about 10 lines from the bottom. O Cleopatra, it grieveth me not that I've lost thy company, for I will not be long from thee. That's all Shakespeare had to go on. Take my word from it. That's the only mention or statement about the afterlife in Plutarch from Antony. And Shakespeare obviously elaborates on it in a very interesting way here that suggests the rewriting of the classical understanding. We looked at soothsayers in Julius Caesar and at their deliberate absence in Coriolanus. How does soothsayers come up in this play? Yeah.
In one of the opening scenes, I believe maybe it's 1.2. We've got a
Yeah.
soothsayer. And the ladies in Cleopatra's court are playing with the soothsayer essentially and saying, so what our future is going to be like, and he doesn't answer that in a way that's very satisfactory to them.
Yeah. People seem obsessed with soothsayers now. Antony travels with one who warns him about the greater luck of Caesar. And it is, if you look at page 8, line 45, we'll know all our fortunes. We saw that Brutus saying, I wish I could know the outcome of this battle before we fight it. Now again, the Coriolanus attitude is, I know the outcome of this battle before I fight it. I'm going to win it. And anyone who doesn't think that, I don't want you in my army. But it's one of the signs of the increasing fatalism in this world, or the increasing sense people have that they don't have control of their lives, that they are really obsessed about soothsayers. Yeah.
Because in a section of the work, it's a little odd because they don't like when they hear their fortune.
Yeah.
It's like playing a Ouija board and flipping it when you don't get the answer you want.
Yeah.
They don't know if they necessarily believe that the soothsayer is somebody who has access to actual fortune so much as thinking like, well, we're in Cleopatra's court and they'll tell us that like everything's gonna go well. They seem to have a different expectation that it can be like clever.
Yeah, well, this is always true with fortune tellers. Now let's look at his specific fortune, or at least, what Charmian asks for on page 7. Good now, some excellent fortune. Let me be married to 3 kings in a forenoon, and widow them all. Let me have a child at 40, to whom Herod of Jewry may do homage. Find me to marry me with Octavius Caesar, and companion me with my mistress. Again, this is not in the source. It's a very detailed prophecy. What does it suggest to you? Yeah.
She'd like to inherit a lot of stuff. Widow them all.
Yeah.
And then she's also, it implies to a certain degree that while this is like a court where personal loyalty is very high, the fact that Caesar is very highly, the fact that she doesn't mind honoring Cleopatra,
Yeah.
that she's also, she's making moves for herself in a lot of ways. She's very much interested in her own person.
Okay. What about, say, the mention of Herod of Jewry here? That strike anybody? Yeah.
When it says to whom Herod of Jewry may do homage, does that mean kind of anti-Semitic that those 3 kings are so rich that even the Jews are sadly by their
That's an interesting one. Why even mention Herod of Jewry here? Yeah.
He and Cleopatra were like constant enemies in a way. Always kind of trying to outmaneuver the other one, and get Rome's favor.
Yeah, it's not true. Herod is mentioned 4 times in the play. If you look at page 67, at the bottom, line 4, that Herod's head I'll have. If you look at page 75, he's mentioned line 73 at the bottom, Herod of Jewry. I should point out Herod is referred to in Plutarch, but at this point he's not. And Shakespeare added that reference there. And then finally, page 106, at the bottom, line 14, Great Herod, to include himself to Caesar. Again, it's in the source, so Shakespeare's not making this up. And there were Antony and Octavius made Herod king of Judea in 40 BC. So it's, again, this is historically accurate. But what does that call to mind?
A new king coming out of Judea.
Yeah, in other words, well, look here, there's a mention of 3 kings in this passage, a miraculous birth, namely a child at 50, of some being that Herod of Jewry might do homage. That's very biblical, is what I'm trying to get at here, that the references to Herod are a clear indication that there's another history going on the time of this play. Now I checked, there are 2 Herods. This is Herod the Great, and this is the Herod that slaughtered the innocents. His son is the Herod that beheaded John the Baptist, and before whom Pontius Pilate would have brought Jesus. But there's a very strong association of Herod of Jewry with the story of Jesus, and it was much stronger, I get the impression, with Shakespeare's audience than it is with this one. Yeah.
So what is Jesus born something like 30 years after this play?
Yes. Yes. This play, Battle of Actium, is 31 BC. I believe Jesus was born in 4 AD. I know that sounds weird, but I believe he was born in 4 AD. But in any case, let's say he was born, around the year 0. So, and we're talking about characters who will live into the day of Jesus. Especially, yes, if Charmian gets to 50, she'll be in the Christian era. And of course, Augustus was famously Roman emperor at the time of Jesus. There are, now again, we'll get to this in more detail, but there are a number of efforts in the play to correlate these events with biblical chronology and to remind us that there are things that are also happening in this world. And last year, one of the students pointed out, marry me with Octavius Caesar. The marriage of the Roman Caesar with a force out of the Middle East was ultimately the Emperor Constantine converting the Roman Empire to Christianity. So there are these hints in the play that what we're seeing happening here points ahead to a big development, that Rome is getting Easternized in this play. It's getting Hellenized. They're now invoking the god Bacchus, who is a divinity who came out of the East and was a god who died and was reborn. There are all these hints that Rome is changing as it encounters this world of the East. And again, I read you that passage from Cato the Elder, that Rome would meet these Greeks and they would change Rome, and now they're meeting these Egyptians and they're changing Rome. And indeed, Rome was swept by a whole series of religious cults that came out of the Middle East. The cult of Mithra, for example. They've found shrines to Mithra in London, left by Roman soldiers who brought this cult along with them. It's very weird, but true. Now, where else does the afterlife come? Yes.
Just about this section. So he gives the soothsayers outdone here by just a woman
Yeah, that's a good.
offering us something in the future.
Yeah, she's a better prophet than he is. Actually, that's a good point.
In a very fun way. Shakespeare seems to be having a lot of fun with us.
Yes, I think there's a wry smile on his face as he writes scenes like this. Again, what I'm getting at is Rome is being transformed in ways that correspond to how it got transformed by Christianity. And I think it's very interesting that Shakespeare is showing it happened independent of Christianity. In that sense, he's showing how Rome became prepared for Christianity. Because it's one of the great mysteries of the ancient world, how the Roman Empire, which seemed so anti-Christian. I mean, Nero persecuting the Christians, how it became Christian. It took 3 centuries, but still is pretty amazing. Yeah.
At least what you've shown us through these 3 plays, the part of the preparation has been the loss of spiritedness and holism.
Yeah.
But really, I think the loss of, Thumos and the rise of Eros, and the Eros, I think, changed into something else, like Caritas.
Yes, exactly. And it begins to be oriented towards the afterlife, immortal longings. Remember, that's what Cleopatra says on page 143, "Give me my robe, put on my crown, I have immortal longings in me." It's what Shakespeare shows, how immortal longings developed or got redirected. After all, the immortal longings of Coriolanus were to win battles and become famous. Now the immortal longings are directed towards immortality, towards a kind of afterlife. Now, since we're on this page, pages 142 to 143, we have a dialogue about the afterlife here with a rustic fig seller. And what seems to be the point of it, again, this is something that comes out of nowhere. Again, the incident is there in Plutarch. Evidently, Cleopatra did have the asp smuggled in by some kind of rural guy, but Shakespeare gives him a dialogue here. Cleopatra really wants to know about this worm. Yeah.
There was an indication very early in the play, one of the notes that there was like kind of a joke about the double meaning of die.
Oh.
I was wondering if that's also what's happening here.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I figured the first time I read it. But,
Yeah. It's actually interesting. Generally speaking, with Shakespeare, if there's a double entendre, if you think there's a double entendre, there is. There aren't dirty jokes in Coriolanus. The closest I can think of is that line when the plebeian worries about being a monstrous member. And again, it's not that Shakespeare went all puritanical on us. It's that I think he felt it would be inappropriate to have dirty jokes in Republican Rome. Actually, famously, Julius Caesar is taught in junior high because it doesn't have dirty jokes in it. There's virtually no sex in Coriolanus and Julius Caesar, and I think that's deliberate. In this play, where would you like the extra inch? Not in my husband's nose. This play is just filled with stuff like that because this is an erotic world now. So yes, die was a pun for orgasm in Shakespeare's day. So that actually suffuses this whole dialogue here. The clown says at 2:45, "But I would not be the party that should desire you to touch him, for his biting is immortal. Those that do die of it do seldom or never recover." Yeah.
Implies that they might recover sometimes, which is a little odd. You could say that maybe it's just that the snake's not particularly effective, but it also implies that maybe there's something after death.
Yeah, I mean, she's basically looking for an easy way to die and has these immortal longings. And this clown does not clarify the situation for her. For one thing, saying his biting is immortal. The notes say his blunder for mortal, and I think that's probably right. But it shows you that there's some confusion as to what is mortality and what is immortality. Hamlet, to be or not to be, he's wondering what happens after we die. That country from whom no one returns. And you see here that when you open the issue of immortality, you're not going to get a very clear-cut answer. Rememberest thou any that have died on? Yes, many men and women too. I heard of one of them no longer than yesterday, a very honest woman, but something given to lie, as a woman should not do, but in the way of honesty. And by the way, that's probably a pun on lie, as not telling the truth and lying down for sex. How she died of the biting of it, what pain she felt. Truly she makes a very good report of the worm. But he that will believe all that they say shall never be saved by half that they do. But this is most fallible, the worm's an odd worm. And again, he mistakes fallible for infallible. And this is, we're now entering a world about beliefs of the afterlife. And it's very confusing. We don't know what's fallible. We don't know what's infallible. We don't know what's mortality. We don't know what's immortality. And he that will believe all that they say shall never be saved by half they do. He opens up a gap between belief and salvation there. You may believe this, but whether you be saved by it, I don't know. Again, this is part and parcel of how confusing this world is compared to the clarity of Coriolanus, a world that has a very narrow understanding, but a clear one, with a world here with these vast horizons, but they are very clouded. Antony's vision of the clouds. You look at a crocodile and you don't even know what it really is. You just have words about it. How long is it? Well, it's of its own length. A lot of the beliefs in this world are of that nature, that they're just words. So we've introduced the afterlife here, but it's a very cloudy vision of it. Now here's another suggestion. We're in a empire here, and we've heard it stressed that it's universal. Does this world now perhaps require a universal God instead of these dumb gods of the city? Just, yeah.
Well, I was thinking about more with cosmology and what draws people together under cosmology. What can they call it? This was brought up yesterday with the problem with a Roman Empire getting too big.
Yeah.
You don't have the fullness, you don't know everyone. Is it impersonal relation?
Yeah.
Some would say perhaps the emperor is that, but if in a dominate, and the emperor himself seems insufficient. So perhaps this is where some kind of unified religion.
Yeah, and in fact, again, the emperor became the one symbol of the unity of the Roman Empire, and he was worshipped as a god, and that's why these emperors put up statues of themselves all around the Mediterranean. It's just unbelievable. You can go to Libya and you can find Roman ruins and statues of the Roman emperors, and they put themselves on coins. Is there any vision of a universal God in this play? Yeah.
The closest thing, I suppose, would be fortune. Because fortune is this one thing that seems that some characters argue applies to everybody equally, whether you be a flood or the emperor.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, Fortune was a Roman god. Actually, was a god in the one of the few remaining Republican buildings in Rome is the Temple of Fortune, which is down near the Tiber, the Bocca di Verità. But does anyone? Yes.
Isn't that at the end of the play when Cleopatra mentions sin and whether or not suicide might be involved? I think that obviously the sin has a Christian meaning to it, but whether or not you would say that any of the Roman gods would be offended by that, or because I think that like they all have their personal agendas too. So some would be upset because maybe they wanted to use that person or
Yeah.
that plan or disrupt something, but others might be happy.
Yeah, they might.
The idea that you acting would then have like a universal standard seems to suggest that there is one judge.
Yeah, and when does that one god appear in the play? Turn to page 135. Again, it's very easy to let this go right by. Certainly every critic who's ever written on the play has let it go by. Cleopatra has a dream of Antony. And by the way, she calls him Emperor Antony here, but on 135, his face was as the heavens, and therein stuck a sun and moon, which kept their course and lighted the little of the earth. That O is wrong. It's a small O. I'll explain in a minute. Most sovereign creature, his legs bestrid the ocean, his reared arm crested the world, his verse was propertied as the tuned spheres. Now this is a vision of a universal deity. His face was as the heavens, and therein stuck a sun and moon. This is not just a god of the city. Now, if you turn to page 152, you'll see this note for line 81 that the text says the little of the earth. You see what I'm saying here? What you have here is an extremely stupid emendation of the text, which was made in the 18th century by a man named Louis Tybalt. That is, we have only one text for Antony and Cleopatra. It's a good one. It's in the 1623 first folio. And what it says, which kept their course and lighted the little of the earth. That is, the little of the earth. A perfectly rational statement. For some reason, this Tybalt guy thought there was something wrong with it and amended it to the little O, the earth, which is a far weirder phrase. Yeah.
Doesn't this happen because, like, some Shakespearean critics think that anytime he puts an O, it's because it's, like, the globe? There's, like,
Yes,
about, like,
yes,
circular
exactly. That
shape of the globe.
this would be a pun on the globe, which is a bit weird because this play likely was performed in the Blackfriars. But in any case, what I want you to see is the text says the little of the earth, which is really interesting then, because then our image is of a giant universal God who is worshipped by the little of the earth, which is exactly what you'd expect in the empire. It's really interesting. Cleopatra has a vision here of a universal God who could provide the universal rallying point for all the subjects of the empire, who are now the little of the earth. By the way, again, pointing in the direction of Christianity, which is a religion for the little of the earth. Not the great ones of the earth, but the little of the earth. This is really an extraordinary passage once you see it that way. And by the way, line 86 and 7, for his bounty was no winter in it. Again, turn to page 152, and you will see that what the text says there is an Antony it was, not an autumn it was. Just a little lesson. There are a lot of things that have crept into the text we use that are wrong because of stupid editors who won't leave well enough alone. What the text says, for his bounty there was no winter in it, and Antony it was, 'twas that grew the more by reaping. Now, again, some editor thought, well, this is odd that she'd say an Antony. Maybe it was autumn, and the people who set the type misread it. But notice, just at the top of the next page, you have to imagine an Antony where nature's peace gets fancy. It's not as if she's not using that phrase elsewhere, and indeed we saw that there's an effort in this play to make Antony replace Caesar, that Antony might become a new title. And I think Cleopatra is doing this. For his bounty there was no winter, and Antony it was that grew the more. In his livery walked crowns and crowns, realms on it. By the way, his legs bestrid the ocean. Why, man, he doth bestride the world like a colossus. It's actually interesting because if you go back, Julius Caesar, why, man, he doth bestride the narrow world like a colossus, and we petty men walk under his huge legs and peep about to find ourselves dishonorable graves. Cassius's image is of a colossus that bestrides the world with little men looking up at it, and he hates it. He hates that idea. Cleopatra, if you will, now sanctifies the empire. His legs bestrid the ocean. Caesar just bestrid Rome. Now is a man that bestrides the Mediterranean, a man God. This is an extraordinary passage here. Again, this is out of nowhere that Shakespeare creates this scene, and it's the image of a universal God that might be worshipped by the little of the earth. And sure enough, after 3 centuries of struggle, a Roman Empire concluded, you know what? This Christian religion, this is what we need. We want the subjects to be passive. This is a religion of passive subjects, which says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Again, so we actually get really a remarkable image here of a universal God that now rules this world. So all the vision of a new God here, a universal God that the little of the earth might worship. It's really, and who would give them his bounty. It's really an extraordinary effort on Shakespeare's part. Now let me call your attention to a few more details about this. The page 94. At the very bottom, Antony says, "Oh, that I were upon the hill of Basan to outroar the horned herd." Where do the bulls of Basan come from? Yeah, isn't this weird? Antony refers to a psalm here. Anyone know how Psalm 22 begins? It begins, my God, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Anyone know where that line also comes from? You know, it's funny, these things don't, it's what Jesus says on the cross in the Gospel according to St. Matthew. Jesus quotes Psalm 22, Look it up. I'm not making this up. The bulls of Bashan are mentioned in Psalm 22, also in Psalm 68. But this is weird. Antony's quoting the Psalms here. Now, again, people will say, oh, Shakespeare grew up in Christian England. His mind was so saturated by the Bible that lines from the Bible come up. But they don't come up in Julius Caesar, and they don't come up in Coriolanus. They come up in Antony and Cleopatra because he's showing that whatever's happened in this play is parallel, and Antony quotes the same psalm that Jesus does. Amazing. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? There's a woman named Ethel Seton back in, I think, what was it, a long time ago, 1946 or 7, discovered that there's a whole series of quotations from the book of Revelations in Antony and Cleopatra. I'll just point them out to you. There's an article called Antony and Cleopatra in the book of Revelations, which is, it's from the Review of English Studies, volume 22, number 87, July 1946. And it's on page 121. When Antony tries to die, and the line 107, the guard says, the star is fallen and time is at its period. These are from Revelations chapter 8, verses 10 to 11, and chapter 9, verse 1, and chapter 10, verse 6. And there fell a great star from heaven. Many of you may recognize that line from Revelations. The star is fallen, and time shall be no more. Time is at its period. By the way, it's interesting, Seton cleverly realized that to understand biblical quotations in Shakespeare, you have to use the Geneva Bible. Many people think the King James Bible is the first translation of the Bible into English. That's untrue. It was the official English Church of England translation. But the Bible had been translated into England by the Swiss, or in Switzerland. That's why it's called the Geneva Bible. Remember, the King James Bible doesn't come out till 1611. So Shakespeare would not have used the King James Bible. So sometimes we miss quotations from the Bible because we're thinking in terms of the King James Bible. By the way, the King James Bible made healthy use of the Geneva Bible. Again, there's this myth that it was this completely new translation, but in fact, I think John Wycliffe had begun to translate the Bible in English, and the King James Bible made great use of earlier translations of the Bible into English. But anyway, Seton established the point, which most scholars have followed since, that if you want to see Shakespeare in relation to the Bible, use the Geneva translation, which is actually available online. Now, anyway, I won't go into all the details here, but she does show at length that very appropriately there are a number of quotations from the book of Revelations in this play, including New Heaven, New Earth, which we saw at the very beginning. In other words, this is a world ripe for revelation. As Yeats says in The Second Coming, surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be reborn. That's very much the feeling in this play, that something's coming to an end. Remember, we've seen it again and again. The sun of Rome is set. And what's going to replace it? And these characters don't quite know what's going to replace Rome, but they have inklings of it, that it will be a miraculous child born under Herod the Great, for example. It's really quite remarkable how much Shakespeare pushes that point. And let us go back to page 100. The scene we looked at last time, and let's look at it in this context now. Antony, with his final night with his companions. I wish I could be made so many men and all of you clapped up together in an Antony, that I might do you service so good as you have done. The gods forbid. Well, my good fellows, wait on me tonight. Scant not my cups, and make as much of me as when mine empire was your fellow too, and suffered my command. What does he mean? To make his followers weep. Tend me tonight. Maybe it is the period of your duty. Haply you shall not see me more, or if a mangled shadow, perchance tomorrow you'll serve another master. I look on you as one that takes his leave. What is this scene? It's the Last Supper. It's absolutely audacious on Shakespeare's part. And there is a man there who will betray Antony, and his name is Enobarbus. Again, Shakespeare's just really having fun here. And then he said at the end, I expect we'll lead you, well, rather I'll expect victorious life. Let's to supper. The scene ends, and this is his last supper with his men, and he's making his followers weep, and they're puzzled by it, and he's tempting them to betray him. Anyway, this is all an attempt to correlate things here. Now, let me try to show you the issue here that I think Shakespeare is exploring in dialogue with Machiavelli and with Nietzsche. That is, Nietzsche was very interested in the relation of Christianity to Rome, and in his writings, he saw Christianity as what had destroyed Rome. And in one of his last books, with the fairly polemical title, The Antichrist, he says it is not, as is supposed, the corruption of antiquity itself, of noble antiquity, that made Christianity possible. Nietzsche said that Rome could have lasted forever. It was only subversion by Christians that did it in. That which stood there forever, the Roman Empire, the most magnificent form of organization under difficult circumstances, was as yet been achieved. Those holy anarchists, the Christians, made it a matter of piety for them to destroy the world, that is, the Roman Empire, until not one stone remained, until even Teutons and other louts could become masters of it. And indeed, in the Antichrist, he says, the Roman Empire, this most admirable work of art in the grand style, was a beginning. Its construction was designed to prove itself through thousands of years. Until today, nobody has built again like this. Nobody has even dreamed of building in such proportions that are eternal. This organization was firm enough to withstand bad emperors. The accident of persons may not have anything to do with such matters, first principle of all grand architecture, but it was not firm enough against the most corrupt kind of corruption, against the Christians. So that's Nietzsche's published view of what happened. But it is interesting that in his notebooks from the same time, the 1880s, stuff he didn't publish, but his sister later published under the title The Will to Power, appears this passage. The generation of the rulers and the ruling classes has been the cause of the greatest mischief in history. Without the Roman Caesars and Roman society, the insanity of Christianity would never have come to power. Come on, Friedrich, tell us what you really think about Christianity. Don't pussyfoot around us. Again, he is not the greatest fan of Christianity. When lesser men begin to doubt whether higher men exist, then the danger is great. And one ends by discovering that there is virtue also among the lowly and subjugated, the poor in spirit, and that before God men are equal. Remember what we saw when Cleopatra said, "'Tis paltry to be Caesar," and feeds the beggar's nurse and the emperor alike. When lesser men begin to doubt whether higher men exist, then the danger is great, and one ends by discovering that there is virtue also among the lowly and subjugated, the poor in spirit, and that before God men are equal. For ultimately the higher men measured themselves according to the standard of virtue of slaves, found that they were proud, found in all their higher qualities something reprehensible. When Nero and Caracalla sat up there, the paradox arose: the lowest man is worth more than that man up there. And the way was prepared for an image of God that was remote as possible from the image of the most powerful, the God on the cross. That's Shakespeare's position. See, it's interesting. Nietzsche alternates between two views. One that was I think a kind of wish on his part that the Roman Empire could have survived bad emperors. It would have lasted forever. Only subversion by Christians could bring it about. He argues that at many points, but I think what Shakespeare would, and look at Machiavelli, who simply contrasts the paganism with Christianity. And paganism's all strength, and Christianity is the celebration of weakness. I think Shakespeare has a much subtler view of this, though he's thinking about the same issues, and that is, if there hadn't been a corruption, an internal corruption of Rome, if the empire hadn't represented corruption and decadence, then Christianity as a world movement would not have been possible. Or more generally, that Christianity flows from this dissolution of the polis, and it was in effect the answer to that, to produce a religion that worked for the kind of universal empire that Rome became. It's very interesting when you enter him into dialogue here with figures like Machiavelli and Nietzsche, who are, these profound students, the relation between the ancient and the Christian world. I think actually Shakespeare is more profound than either of them, and that his analysis here is even more interesting. That in effect, as long as the aristocracy had faith in itself, it would have stood, as Nietzsche said, hostile against the assault of Christianity. But what you see here is the whole aristocracy has lost faith in itself. Cleopatra, a queen, starts talking about there's no difference between great and ordinary people. She wants a God for the little of the earth. And then there are just many examples in the play of what Nietzsche saw as the redefinition of nobility in the Christian world. It even gets to Octavius on page 146, line 343, where he says, "Noble weakness." That, in a way, epitomizes everything I've been trying to say about this play. Again, Coriolanus does not speak of noble weakness. The plebeians don't claim to be noble. They don't claim, in Coriolanus, they don't claim to be better than the nobles. They just want their share and not to be treated with utter contempt. But by the end of this play, weakness has become nobility, and there's a whole series of these paradoxes in the play. Look at page 141, where bottom of 141, Cleopatra says, "What poor an instrument may do a noble deed, he brings me liberty." And there we see all sorts of Roman concepts being transformed. Not give me liberty or give me death, give me death as liberty here. And what poor an instrument may do a noble deed. Or say, look at page 120 with Antony. By the way, Look at page 120, about line 78. Come then, for with a wound I must be cured. This is the paradoxical mode that runs throughout this play. That a wound is really a cure. By the way, Eros then says to him, line 85, turn from me that noble countenance wherein the worship of the whole world lies. And there you see again the formula for the universal deity. Rome has created a whole world. We now need a god for that world to worship. Page 121, Antony says to his servant, thrice nobler than myself. Line 95. My queen and Eros have by the brave instruction got upon me a nobleness and record. This is systematic redefinition of nobility. Thy master dies thy scholar. You know, the reversal of the role of masters and servants. And then line 108, let him that loves me strike me dead. And again, formula in this play, death is life, defeat is victory, weakness is strength, wherever we look in the play. So you see a massively transformed ancient world by the time of this play. Again, Nietzsche understood it, that if the Caesars are so manifestly corrupt, it transforms people's notion of the aristocratic order. They're really not better than we are, and in fact we're better than they are. So it turns the whole aristocratic order on its head.
When Hercules leaves on
Yeah,
page
yeah,
43,
yeah.
so then I take it peace is now on the scene.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if we can relate this also to when peace is there or no outside threats are there, as we spoke of earlier.
Yeah.
Rome then turns towards itself and battles itself. And then ultimately, since you brought up Nietzsche, I'm reminded of aphorism 51 and beyond, where the aristocrat comes across the saint and sees that the saint has found someone new to conquer, namely himself. I'm wondering also.
Oh, wow. Yes, because Antony conquers himself.
So I'm wondering if there's a component of even this peace coming about that's also part of the preparation of the ground.
Oh, absolutely. Now, first, let me say this. The Hercules moment is very interesting because in Plutarch, it's Bacchus that deserts Antony, not Hercules. And Shakespeare knows that's wrong. Bacchus is coming. He's not leaving. Antony is following the god of wine and orgies and excess, the Eastern god, the resurrected god, and Hercules represents classical virtue. So again, it's so wonderful that we have the sources here and can see what Shakespeare changes. And the fact that he changed that, he has them invoke Bacchus at the end of Act 2. But again, in the source, it would be Bacchus that's leaving him, but Shakespeare knows it's Hercules. But indeed, Christian theologians recognize the fact that the peace of the Roman Empire prepared the way for the spread of Christianity. It's what made it possible for the apostles to move around. And yes.
I just have a quick question for the group. It seems like a lot of the philosophers we're citing, in addition to this text, makes Christianity out to be an enfeebling force on civilization.
Yeah.
Do you guys accept that? Christians, is a Christian state weaker than a non-Christian state?
Okay, I'll comment on it after.
Well, I'm skeptical if it could be a Christian state. So,
Okay, but in a society that is predominated by Christianity.
Well, I would argue that's a different kind of trend. Strength and violence is not strength itself. When I read Coriolanus and the brutality of Republican Rome,
see that it's more powerful from the Christian point of view, and
Yeah.
enfeebling from, let's say, Coriolanus.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we,
Okay, so we
so we
leave-
have,
Yeah.
we have two very different perspectives, and I think that's.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what, again, I've been stressing that Shakespeare does not simply prefer the Roman Republic to the Roman Empire. You could say that the Roman Republic is the superior political system, but is politics the be-all and the end-all of human life? And I think what Shakespeare shows on this issue is that Christianity makes human beings a hell of a lot more interesting. And the irony is that Nietzsche shows that. For all his apparent hostility to Christianity, he says in the Genealogy of Morals, for the first time Christianity made human beings interesting because it gave them souls. And this is why characters like Hamlet, Macbeth, and Othello are so much more interesting than, say, Coriolanus. Coriolanus is a monolithic character, and you want a warrior, there he is. But he's like a machine. He's compared to a machine. He really has no romantic love in him. He has no interior depth. He has no thoughtfulness. And again, he's magnificent, the way Achilles is magnificent. And this is one human ideal, and it is still with us. Nietzsche has this wonderful line where he says, ask a little kid if he wishes to be more moral than his friends, and he'll just look at you bewildered. But ask him if he'd like to be stronger than his friends, and watch his eyes light up. And that shows you that the admiration of sheer strength remains in our culture. We see it in athletics, we see it in our superheroes, and in our movies. On the other hand, we have other human ideals, and Christianity is offered one of them. And it's a very complicating ideal because it does overturn that old ideal and tells you now that strength is weakness. And what you call our weakness is the real strength because it's inner strength. I think Shakespeare is very aware of this, and that when he creates what most people think of as his most complex heroes, they are Christian figures, though, by the way, in tension with classical values. I have a little book on Hamlet. It's the only one of my Shakespeare books that's still in print, and I recommend it to you. And it's all about the tension between classicism and Christianity and Hamlet. I'll just say that, in Hamlet, the whole play is focused on the issue that splits classicism and Christianity, namely revenge. It turns out. So, and again, the strange thing of this is that Nietzsche understands that, and that Christianity introduces a whole new dimension into human life. Surely it complicates politics, and that's what Shakespeare portrays in say, his history plays, or in plays like Hamlet, Macbeth, and Othello. But it is, obviously there have been great Christian warriors. There were the Crusades. So something happened, especially when the Roman Empire adopted Christianity. So, yeah.
A lot of theologians refer to it as the Constantinian Revolution.
Yeah.
So what you have is, once Christianity becomes the religion of the empire, what you see is a religion where being a member of the church will be, and you were caught, you were persecuted, you were killed, and you were sent to the lions. And therefore, as a member of the church, you are one entirely devoted to the faith. And then when you have the Constantinian Revolution, you have, especially among the aristocracy, the nominal Christians, the ones that adopt the ornaments of the faith. They go to church, they celebrate the liturgy, but in the end, in terms of internal truth, they don't exactly internalize it. So I think that's where a lot of the
Yeah, I mean, once Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, things got really complicated, and Protestants would say of the Catholic Church that it itself. It created a churchly aristocracy. I mean, again, so what really complicates things is what appears at first as a simple opposition turns into a fusion when Constantine adopts Christianity. And there's Christians will tell you that Constantine had a vision during the Battle of Milvius, and that's why he's converted. Sometimes read Jakob Burckhardt's account in his Age of Constantine, where he basically says it was a political move. Constantine saw the empire falling apart, and this was the only way he thought he could unify it. So anyway, it's all very complicated, and maybe we can talk about it in our last session. But okay, just to conclude this session and take a break, what I've tried to show here is that at a minimum, Shakespeare throws a lot of things into this play to correlate these events with the rise of Christianity. References to Herod of Jewry, buried quotations from the New Testament and the Old Testament. Things to remind us of, in fact, the obvious fact that what's happening in here is correlated with biblical chronology and will ultimately have an effect upon it. That miraculous child will marry Caesar someday under Constantine. But what Shakespeare shows is a lot of the moral revolution that Christianity brought about, what Nietzsche calls the revaluation of values, what he calls the slave revolt morality. In fact, it was happening before Christianity, that he's showing us there was something ripe for Christianity in Rome. And again, to say that this undermines and replaces the Republic is not necessarily to say that it's bad or that it's uniformly bad, because we've seen a lot of human possibilities open up in this play. A kind of infinite love that was simply unknown in the empire. The mixing of masters and servants, these are not necessarily bad. They're not necessarily good, or let's put it this way, they involve losses as well as gains. I think Shakespeare, again, is Shakespeare, the great dramatist he is, because he can always see two sides of a question. And yes, in a way, I'm contrasting him with Machiavelli and Nietzsche here, who gives such a negative view of these developments because they're interested in strength and military victory. And Shakespeare is, again, I don't want to deny that he liked a parade. I mean, if you just look at what he chose to write about, his heroes usually have a military dimension to them, and sometimes little else, as in the case of Coriolanus. But Shakespeare knew there was a lot more to life, including what he did. And we see that what he did, poetry, is absent completely in the world of Coriolanus and does not fare well even in the world of Julius Caesar, where poets are thrown out of the room or ripped to pieces. And so I think that's some sign that he didn't simply prefer that world. And Antony and Cleopatra is a world of theater now. They now have theater. And one of the things this world is more open to is poetry. So let's take a break now. We got a lot of stuff on the table now that we can pursue. Okay, guys, this is our last session, but we can make it a good one. A way I could sum up what I was trying to show in the Roman plays is, Machiavelli offers this contrast between the pagan world and the Christian world. Doesn't explicitly show how you get from one to another, although there's a kind of buried story in the discourse of how the Christians develop propaganda and subvert the ancient world. I think Shakespeare was really asking the question in the Roman plays, how do we get from the ancient world to the Christian world, And Antony and Cleopatra is a very serious attempt to explore that, as I tried to show you. And it's why yesterday we found all these signs of the medieval world in Antony and Cleopatra, that you virtually are in the world of courtly love. Antony calls himself Cleopatra's squire at one point. I mean, so it is a very, I think, profound analysis of the transformations that accompanied the switch from republic to empire, all of which I think Shakespeare felt were parallel with the rise of Christianity and ultimately prepared Rome to be conquered by Christianity. So the floor is open.
I had a question about Antony's last speech
Yeah.
and what you make of it, particularly because there are these signs of death as life, weakness as strength. This is on page 125. He talks about how he wants to be remembered as the greatest prince of the world, the noblest, and does not now basely die. But then he also makes reference to himself being a Roman, by a Roman valiantly vanquished.
Yeah.
So I was wondering. I mean,
By the way, the next line is, "Now my spirit is going, I can no more." It has a Jesus-like feel to it, but
So
yeah.
I was actually just quite interested in your interpretation of this particular passage.
Well, I just realized from the comments we had last time that this is turning Roman conquest into self-conquest. It really is. That now notice, this is still in a way the philosophy of a loser. He's trying to find a way to save his reputation. Octavius is the greatest prince in the world now. And Antony, as a loser, is trying to grasp victory and defeat. So he's trying to, I do not basely die. There's a lot of people that would say he's basely dying, that he threw away everything for this woman, and what he did was disgraceful, it was shameful, and so he's finding a way to say, no, this was, I am the noblest Roman of them all. And so it is, Cassius and Brutus don't say this about their suicides. This is a continuation of the rhetoric that Brutus introduced about "I'll have more glory by this losing day." Now my spirit is going, I can no more. So it's part and parcel of that redefinition. And again, we can understand it, but it would be the idea that what's open now is self-conquest. And again, I'm not saying we need to prefer Coriolanus to Antony. Quite frankly, the vast majority of critics prefer Antony to Coriolanus. But again, imagine what Coriolanus would say about this. This is conquest. Killing Volscians, that's conquest. That great moment in Conan the Barbarian, that great late manifestation of classical ethics. What is happiness? To smash your enemies and hear the lamentation of their women. I mean, that's very far from this. I just, the guy that wrote Conan, was his name Howard? Anyway, he was a Nietzschean, by the way. So it's all this connects here. Yes.
Sort of just right before that, I was wondering what we can make of the death of Eros. If Hercules is leaving Antony, what does it mean that Eros, I mean, he is, yes, he's an actual physical character, but
Yeah.
he's also leaving Antony. Not only that, it's killing himself, so Eros doesn't exist after that.
Yeah, again, Shakespeare must have just fallen out of his chair when he saw there was a character named Eros and a source here. But that's a wonderful scene. It allows Antony to participate more in this redefinition of nobleness. I get there's a kind of self-killing of Eros in this play, or because what what emerges is the medieval idea of Liebestod, love death, that Eros, this peculiar turn of Eros, which we think of as positive and life affirming, in this world it turns in on itself, where death becomes the logical conclusion of Eros, where Antony dies for Cleopatra, Cleopatra dies for Antony, just as Romeo died for Juliet, and Juliet died for Romeo. Because when Eros becomes infinite, it becomes in a way the negation of itself, and that's where the link to death comes up, because the only way of achieving the infinite is the non-finite, and that means dying, something that negates everything. And again, it's the peculiar logic of medieval love poetry, that you see it all over. And again, Tristan and Isolde, which is a great medieval theme, and it appears in France first and then in Austria, and becomes in a way the great theme. But even the Lancelot and Guinevere story, there's so Troilus and Cressida, there's so much obsession with death in medieval love poetry, and I think it follows from this logic. And Shakespeare would have understood this, because he had pursued that theme in Romeo and Juliet. His comedies are an attempt to correct it, to get people to choose life instead of death in love. In his love tragedy, there's only Juliet for Romeo, there's only Romeo for Juliet. In his comedies, there's Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice. There's Hermia and Helena and Lysander and Demetrius. And in his comedies, people learn to accept what's left over and not die for love. There's a great line in As You Like It, when Rosalind said, many men have died, but not for love. So anyway, Shakespeare had, we often call this Petrarchan love because of Petrarch's love of sonnets, and much of Shakespeare's comedies are an attempt to destroy the myth of Petrarchan love. Romeo is the great victim of Petrarchan love. Mercutio says now is for the numbers that Petrarch flowed in. So Shakespeare had explored this issue in terms of late medieval poetry, and again his comedies deal with it. Romeo and Juliet deals with it, and so he had a lot of background when he came to examine this in Antony and Cleopatra. And I think it's no accident, therefore, that so much. It's as if the Republic falls and we're already in the Middle Ages, according to Shakespeare. Let me see if I can find. Yeah, page 104 at the very top. My queen's a squire. Really, I mean, this whole scene of a woman dressing her knight for battle, it's incredibly medieval. And Shakespeare's Cymbeline seems to be something similar, that already in the realm of Augustus, Italy is in the Middle Ages. Yes?
I noticed that in this play, couples are mentioned, that they were mentioned in Julius Caesar, Amelia, Coriolanus, and I think that kind of shows the transition from, if they're going to introduce love, there's also this trade-off that now like people aren't going to be as faithful to each other. But what do you make of the lack of children in this? Because I know that at some point they mentioned Cleopatra's sons with Antony.
Yeah.
She has a bunch of these children, but we never see them. But in Coriolanus we did see
Yeah.
them.
Well, I mentioned that the empire seems peculiarly sterile. Calpurnia seemed infertile. There seems to be a worry there about children. The curious thing, the empire has no future. It did. It lasted 500 years, or 470. But going back to the soothsayer, So page 7, you have seen and proved a fairer former fortune than that which is to approach. That's true for everybody in this play. It's an ominous note at the beginning that you've seen the best of your days. Now, Coriolanus is when Rome has its whole future ahead of us. He's got a little kid. He says, even if you destroy Rome, I'll run away and I'll come back and fight. And Shakespeare shows in Coriolanus a Rome that has, as indeed it did, a long future instead of it. But he really, politically seems negative on the empire. It would have been so easy to introduce something about all the great things Octavius was going to do about Augustus, and yet he doesn't. And son of Rome is said at the end of Julius Caesar. Here, everything good seems to be in the past, and there's this sense of staleness. At his worst suspicions of Cleopatra, Antony says, I found you as cold meat. You're leftovers. Had an affair with Julius Caesar, with Gnaeus Pompey, and there's a sense of staleness about Rome. So it would accord with the idea that we don't see children. We don't see the future of Rome. Now, what you said about cuckolds is exactly right, that the issue of fidelity and love takes on a whole new significance in this world, which is a world of faith. Now, again, Virgilia doesn't worry about Coriolanus' faithfulness, and he doesn't worry about her faithfulness. Love is so much a part of the regime there that it's solid and you can depend upon it. This is a world in which faith, loyalty, and fidelity have emerged as the paramount virtue. And I think it's in the absence of the ability to refer to the common good that the Republic held up. And as a result, fidelity in marriage takes on a whole new dimension, as it does in the Christian world. Alan Bloom points out in his essay on Othello that story can only take place in the Christian world, and that cuckolds were the subject of comedy in the ancient world. This was a subject to laugh over. Now, there are stories of jealousy, and Medea is a great story of jealousy. And the gods are presented as jealous. But you cannot find an ancient tragedy that is based on the issue of cuckolding. It's the great theme of Roman comedy. And Bloom argues that Christianity makes infidelity and love a tragic subject. And I think that's a very profound insight. And in some ways, Othello is laughable, especially since Desdemona wasn't unfaithful. And when you think about it, Othello has to struggle to stay in a tragedy. If he doesn't kill Desdemona and himself, and lets the story come out, he's the laughingstock of Venice, because he believed this dumb story about his wife. And there's this curious way in which he must create the tragic outcome in order to keep himself in a tragedy. If you really think about it, that Othello is that's the matter of comedy there, and it's again Shakespeare's genius, and that he's able to turn this into a tragedy, and it's because Othello has staked everything, including his self-image, on Desdemona's faithfulness to him. And you see what faith means. And he wants evidence as sure as Holy Writ, he says to Iago. So indeed, the emergence of the issue of faithfulness in marriage, where you just see in Antony's case, he has staked everything on Cleopatra's love for him. If Coriolanus were betrayed by Virgilia, he'd be upset for a few minutes before he killed her. And that would be the end of it. And his self-esteem would not be involved with it. But this Antony and Cleopatra is a world where faith now has gone to the depths of people's souls. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Yes.
So I'm wondering if we could add to faith, loyalty, and fidelity, jealousy. Is a big component.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I'm curious in comparison with Coriolanus, where we have both Aufidius and Coriolanus say something of envying the other. I would envy him,
Yeah.
Coriolanus, if I weren't me.
Yeah.
And I think Aufidius says, I would envy him if I didn't hate him so much. And nonetheless, I feel okay in saying this about these plays, but I'm having a hard time understanding Cassius in his initial speech to Brutus regarding Caesar. Is this envy? Is this jealousy? Is this hatred? Is this
I think
love?
it's envy. It's really interesting. People constantly misuse these terms, envy and jealousy. And envy comes from the competitiveness of people. You envy someone who appears to be better than you or who has something more than you. Your jealousy should only be used of love. And so, in fact, you could almost, envy is so characteristic of the ancient world, and I'm not saying that jealousy is simply a Christian phenomenon, but you have a jealous God in Christianity because he wants your faith, and is angry when you betray your faith to him. But faith is elevated to a level of new importance in the Jewish as well as the Christian world, and that's why, again, that jealousy becomes the subject of a tragedy. Jealousy is comic in the ancient world because it's a sign of weakness. But Judaism and Christianity introduced the notion of even a jealous God. So I really think if you keep envy and jealousy straight and separate, you'd see a lot about these plays. There's no jealousy in Coriolanus. There's a lot of envy.
And Cassius is...
It would be envy. Yeah, I think it really is envy.
He's a greater a man than me.
Yeah, and for example, I don't think, he's not jealous that Brutus loves Julius Caesar more than he loves Cassius. He's envious out of a spirit of emulation. This man is too famous. And it's a great example of envy because it is, I'm as good as he is. Envy is the great academic passion, by the way. It's the ruling passion of the academic world. Won't comment further on that. Yes.
What do you think is wrong with Antony and Cleopatra's love?
Well, it ruins their lives and everybody else's. Thousands of people die over their love. So, again, I should say that the majority of critics of the play don't see anything wrong with their love, and they think it's glorious. And Dryden's formula, all for love of the world well lost. There's a guy named G. Wilson Knight who was operating in the 30s, 40s, 50s. He just goes gaga over this love. It's just triumphant, and they triumph over everything, over life itself. They achieve an apotheosis at the end. And I don't want to minimize that there's something very powerful about this love and very admirable, and it issues in great poetry. I mean, again, that's nothing Coriolanus does issues in great poetry, either on his part or anybody else's. There is, by comparison, a kind of flatness to the poetry in that play. And the mode of Coriolanus and Julius Caesar is rhetorical. It's not lyrical. Antony and Cleopatra take us to a level, an unparalleled level of lyricism. And they sacrifice so much for the other. But they're so jealous, and they're so petty. I mean, they just, let's not forget all the quarreling and all the distrust and the justifiable distrust. I mean, when Antony, she killed herself for me. She was faithful. I'll kill myself for her. She has said a lie to him. And she isn't going to go direct to her suicide. And she's going to check out if Octavius is amenable to her charms first. And it's only when she's convinced that he isn't that she kills herself. So I find them both morally dubious. Since I don't see morality as coextensive with human excellence, I can also say some nice things about them. But, they're look at it from Phidias's point of view, from the messenger's point of view. These are people who almost get gold poured down their throat because Antony and Cleopatra are having a spat. And, they do have public obligations. A lot of people are depending upon them. Egypt is going to end up a Roman province at the end of this play. And, it's never going to bounce back, alas, as we're seeing right now. Just one hellhole after another there. And so anyway, there goes the rebroadcast rights in Egypt. I mean, if you take, it's so hard for literary critics to do this, but if you take a kind of ordinary moral political perspective on Antony and Cleopatra, they're absolute wretches. They're so self-absorbed and narcissistic. They're willing to let their countries, their followers, die on a massive scale to play out this great game. And it is, the world to wheat we stand up peerless. It's massive narcissism. It's predictive of Hollywood stars. Shows you how narcissistic they are. Yes.
So I'm trying to think about what went wrong with all of this, going from the Roman Coriolanus to
Yeah.
and to me, it seems that I can identify three things: the military successes, which would lead to the removal of external threats; economic prosperity, which comes along with that, which is the softness; and the lack of conflict between the plebeians and patricians.
Yeah.
But it seems like those three things are all are all synonymous, really, with distinct political goods of safety, prosperity, and unity.
Yeah.
So is this the tragedy of how it's inevitable in societies that actually achieve what the
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I mean, I refer to this as, Shakespeare's tragedy of Rome, that Rome itself is tragic because what makes it great ultimately defeats it. And this is, a very good book about Rome is Montesquieu's little book, The Grandeur of Rome and Romans and Their Decline, or something like that. And it takes this view. Now, Gibbon wrote about the decline and fall. People often think his title is The Rise and Fall, but it really is the decline and fall. But by the 18th century, Rome had become a kind of watchword of this issue. There's a cycle of paintings by Thomas Cole, the great British-American painter, which is the cycle of empire. It's in the New York Historical Society Museum in Manhattan. I got to see it in a big Thomas Cole exhibit, the National Gallery here. But I think it's 5 paintings, and it's, it begins in a kind of rural, pastoral, idyllic world, and then you see the buildings are sort of Roman. You see the city built up and then turning to war, and then there's decadence, and then you see ruins. It was really a very common motif. I think it's something the founding fathers worried about and hoped that we could avoid Rome's fate. Now, again, let's give them a little credit. 500 years ain't so bad, their record, but it really, it's the rise and fall of empires. It's something that has haunted every empire. I have to teach a course on the fiction of empire in English and the fiction of the British Empire, and all the British were haunted by memories of Rome and other ancient civilizations. When they dug up Nineveh, they started writing poems about the fall of Nineveh already. So it is a haunting thought that any regime ultimately will be corrupted. Now, it's the theme of books 8 and 9 of Plato's Republic, which is about the cycle of regimes. If you go to Polybius, the idea of the mixed regime was maybe there might be a way of halting the decline of regimes by creating a mixed regime, and people offered Sparta and Rome as examples of that, but again, even Rome declines. So there is something haunting about this, that the very success of a regime ultimately corrupts it. And there's no example of any country that has ever survived uncorrupted. Yes.
Would you argue that the decline of the Roman Empire began when they shifted to being an empire as opposed to being a republic? Just like, because there's arguments where, like, the Ottomans, for example, were starting to decline 2 centuries, like, at the height of their power.
Yeah. I mean, I think Shakespeare's view is the empire is immediate decline. And that's what's striking about this play, because that's, again, in his day, most of the interest was in the Roman Empire, because, again, what we see of Rome is imperial, and it looks pretty grand. I mean, again, all those things you picture of Rome are imperial. I don't think any of you go to sleep dreaming of Largo, Argentina, or the Temple of Fortune, and movies don't show them. The Colosseum and all that's imperial. And of course, what people will say is Augustus did a lot to stabilize the situation he created. He tried to preserve the appearances of the Republic. He did a lot, as he saw it, to restore Republican virtue. It's interesting, one of the things he did was to force patricians to have children. It was one of the aspects of the corruption of the imperial world, that people had lost interest in the future, lost interest in having children, and Augustus saw what was ominous about that, and one of his policies was to encourage the patricians to have children. I think even punish them if they didn't. So he did a lot to mitigate what was wrong with the empire. But historically, it's astounding how quickly characters like Nero and Caligula ended up on the throne. 2 generations, really, after Augustus, 30, 40 years. I mean, the Roman Empire went downhill pretty fast, and I think Shakespeare noticed that fact in Plutarch, that Nero is a direct descendant of Mark Antony. And then, you get Nero was so bad, they began to realize we better not just take whoever comes from this Julio-Claudian family, and they bring in a Trajan or is it first Vespasian first? Maybe they bring in a Spaniard as emperor, and you start to get some good emperors. Hadrian was very impressive. So yeah, the Roman Empire had its great moments. It did conquer some more territory, though under Hadrian it stabilized its borders. And there's a lot to be said for the Roman Empire. Nietzsche admired it very much. But it's curious that Shakespeare seems to say, as soon as you get to the empire, it's decadent and corrupt. You almost have Nero already. I mean, Antony is very close to the decadent, tyrannical Roman emperor. So for Shakespeare, it seems to be that Rome is the republic, and that when the republic is gone, the sun of Rome is set, and Roman virtue is gone, and you could have a child running it. So I do think Shakespeare's take on it is very negative about the empire, and that's fairly common, actually. It's Montesquieu's view of Rome as well. But it's hard to say anything for the empire here other than it brings peace. Yes?
In light of what you just said, and in light of, depending on your historical interpretation, the Roman Empire ending in 1453.
Yeah.
With the fall of Constantinople.
Yeah.
Is Shakespeare a Republican at heart?
Okay, that's very difficult. You make an interesting point that, by the way, I mean, if you want to give Rome credit, in some ways it lasts till 1453, because the Byzantines called themselves Romans, and
Byzantine being something that the Westerners.
Right. I mean, they spoke Greek, but they considered themselves the Romans. And, Constantine moved the capital to Byzantium and modestly turned it into Constantinople. And it survived another 1,100 years. It's pretty spectacular. All because of this unbelievable military machine that the Romans, and of course the Byzantine Empire had its ups and downs. By the time it fell, it was almost nothing. Anyway, been reduced to what was within the walls of Constantinople. But still, it's worth mentioning. And you said something else that I wanted to respond to. And repeat what you were saying roughly.
The word Byzantine?
No, in your first statement. Oh, is he? Yes, you asked me, is he a Republican? There's no simple answer to that. And again, we kind of want, Shakespeare's politics. Would he have voted Republican or Democrat? Sort of. It's very difficult to pin down his politics. I'll say this much. He obviously admired the Republican form of government, and he was unusual in that respect. Most of the playwrights of his day, when they wrote about Rome, wrote about the empire. I think Shakespeare was fascinated by the Republican possibility, and in particular saw the connection between, oddly enough, republicanism and empire. That if you wanted to conquer the world, a Republican form of government gave you the kind of impetus and energy to do it, which is a Machiavellian theme. Now, Shakespeare did not walk through the streets of London with a big sign saying, "Give me a republic or death," because he knew that the latter alternative was much more likely in that case. I do think if you read his history plays, and I have in mind particularly the sequence Richard II, Henry IV, Part 1 and 2, and Henry V, that Shakespeare was hoping to direct the English monarchy in a republican direction. That he shows in the case of Richard II that a king who tries to rule with no regard for his people and his nobles is doomed, and indeed a king who rules with contempt for his nobles is doomed. And that the great lesson of that sequence of history plays is that within a monarchy you could introduce an aristocratic and a popular element. And what he shows about Henry IV as a prince, as he grows up in taverns, gets to know his people, learns their language, and it's not that he really respects them, but he learns their importance and how to appeal to them and get them on his side, so he's their hero. And similarly, he learns to manage his nobles and, above all, give them a war against France in which they can profit and feel they're participating in the government. And then Henry V is Shakespeare's portrait of an ideal monarch, or a monarch as good as a monarch gets, and what he shows is that the monarch shouldn't try to rule singly, but should try to get the nobles, the people, on his side. So I'm guessing Shakespeare was a practical man, and that he understood it was improbable that England would get a republic, though it got one some 40 years later. But for example, that proved to be disastrous, and it's very likely Shakespeare, if you asked him, might have said that we can't have a republic. But we could have a monarchy that's more republican and that gets some of the virtues of a republic. Now, historically, that's what happened. In part, England got a republic and it failed. And in a way, it's as if the Republicans learned we can't just overthrow the monarchy, and the monarchs learned we better make some concessions to republicanism. And the English monarchy of the 18th century was a kind of mixed regime. The Stuarts resisted parliamentary power and tried to invoke absolute monarchy, and Charles I was beheaded as a result. What you get in the 18th century in England is a very nice balance between the monarchy, the House of Lords, and the House of Commons. That's a kind of, England has no written constitution, has an adaptable constitution. You can argue, my first paper on Coriolanus as a junior in college was written in a course taught by Harvey Mansfield, which among other things studied the 18th century British monarchy as a mixed regime, which then leads to American government as a mixed regime. So it's all very interesting. What I'm saying is England did end up with a kind of mixed regime and not a pure monarchy. The French monarchy fell. The English monarchy did not. After the Glorious Revolution in 1688, when, for example, Parliament essentially made the point the monarch serves at the pleasure of Parliament, which is a mixed regime. So I'm saying, what Shakespeare's role in that was, I cannot claim. Ostensibly, he had no role in it, and all this follows from some very significant historical effects. The Puritan Revolution, its failure, the 1688 Revolution, its success. But whether people were learning from Shakespeare's plays, I don't rule out that possibility. Because in a way, what he does outline in Henry V is the regime that did emerge in the 18th century. Just one more tribute to Shakespeare. Whether, everybody was watching these plays, except the Puritans. And whether the monarchs learned from them, whether the politicians did, I don't know. I was very struck walking through London. There's a statue to General Burgoyne. You're not going to find too many of them over here, but it's that General Burgoyne, and there's a quotation from Coriolanus on it. Something about it, from Comenius' speech, how young he served his country. There's a quotation from Coriolanus on that statue to the evil General Burgoyne, whom the British admired. And you just wonder how much were these plays the Iliad and Odyssey of the English people. People have referred to the Henry plays as the Henriad, as if Shakespeare wrote the Iliad for the English people, as if he was writing the epic. And, we cannot say that Shakespeare's plays are the Bible of the English people in the way we really can say that Homer's epics are the Bible of the Greek people. Plato talks of them as such. On the other hand, I would not underestimate the role of Shakespeare's plays in shaping the English people. And I would not rule out the possibility that Shakespeare had that goal in mind, that he discovered that the theater was the epic of his day. The epic was the great mode of public performance among the ancient Greeks. These rhapsodes recited the Iliad and the Odyssey to large audiences, according to Plato, as many as 20,000. I think Shakespeare realized the epic had become bookish in his day. Let Edmund Spenser write The Faerie Queen. Who the hell is ever going to read that? But I'll write these plays, and the English people will see them, and I will shape them. Now, again, I got no proof of that. Although, opening Act 5 of Henry V compares Henry's return from Agincourt to a Roman triumph, and compares that in turn to what Shakespeare hoped to be the Earl of Essex triumphant return from Ireland. Maybe, again, he was not simply a Republican. I believe he wanted to learn what he could from a Republican government. That was the Italians revived Republican government. Machiavelli became the analyst of that. I think Shakespeare saw a lot to be said for republics. He probably understood that it would be too disruptive to turn England from a monarchy to a republic, as in fact proved to be the case in the 1650s. I think though that he wanted to remake the English monarchy on the model of a republic, and may have actually done it. Yeah.
Yeah, I just had a question about the disappearance of the plebes in Antony.
Yeah.
It seems like plays are something which is inherently for a public, and historically has been for a public which is much larger than the patricians or
Yeah.
the upper class would be. So whether it's Greek tragedies or Shakespeare, it
Yeah.
appeals to a very large base. There seems to be a way in which Eros is itself somewhat democratic.
Yeah.
And yet they're completely absent in the most Eros-filled play.
Yeah. Well, again, that's what's so characteristic of the empire, that it has turned everybody into subjects and taken away the institutions that traditionally allowed people to participate in politics. So it really is quite striking, the disappearance of the plebeians. There's only one reference to them, and for example, Pompey pins his hopes on the people, and it turns out to be worthless. Bottom of page 27, I shall do well, the people love me. Man, that doesn't prove to be true for him. Yeah, farewell plebeians. But they had the choice, and they voted for Caesarism. Yes.
My question is about maybe Coriolanus and a bit of Julius Caesar on Volumnia. Do you think the time of a great man has passed? And I just want to emphasize the element of deserving to rule, not necessarily eventually ruling.
Yeah.
Coriolanus does not rule, Caesar does not, become an emperor. Volumnia cannot. Do you think that in this time and age that there are people out there who deserve to rule?
You mean now?
Yeah, like right now.
Whoa, you're putting me on the on the line here. I would never underestimate great men. They're great, or women, because their greatness means precisely that they're unpredictable and they can take control of things when no one thinks they can be taken control of. And we'll, just to give one variant of it, it is, really remarkable that up to this point, the United States has gotten great generals when it needed them in the most improbable circumstances, and every goddamn tyranny and dictatorship on this earth has thought we couldn't do it. And I would tell would-be dictators out there, don't underestimate the military strength of the United States as long as we have the Second Amendment. And as long as we have Appalachia. That is, it's just really amazing that, oh yeah, Germany, 3 centuries of Prussian aristocratic military, we got von Rundstedt, and, what has America got? Well, MacArthur and Patton, as it turned out. And where the hell did they come from? So in the Coriolanus terms, you want to ask, more specifically, where you get the military leaders, and I don't know if this will be true anymore. And you have to look at what we got now and worry about it when we're relying so much on technology. And anyway, but I will say, so far so good with the United States, and a pretty remarkable history of generating great men in military terms. And who knows? We've always had our children play at war, and now they're playing at video games. And those people who condemn video games should realize that's the future of warfare. And the fact that we got the best video game players in the world may mean that we're going to have the best military in the future. So now, in the larger sense of political great men, I do not look at the American political landscape today and see it littered with great men. I've got to tell you that. But I'm fairly pessimistic about American politics and the future of America. We may be living in a kind of postmodern age where we are manufacturing the simulacra of great men and women, and I am not impressed with the heroic virtue of our politicians. I mean, when you look at this possibility of the Spitzer Wiener ticket in New York, the temptation to despair is nearly overwhelming. But great men and women are precisely people that rise to an occasion, and who knows what will come along. Again, I have to say I'm pretty cynical about American politics and wonder what television has done to it. And, for example, the severing of military and politics, it's really interesting that, neither, you look at the first Gulf War, Schwarzkopf was pretty impressive, I guess, as a general, and Colin Powell. And, neither one went into politics. Powell came close and had personal reasons for not doing it, but it's kind of interesting that was a war that recreated certain sense, the grandeur of war. And it did not generate a political figure, and its biggest hero was the Patriot missile. Actually, it was a piece of technology. There was no Audie Murphy even coming out of it, no Sergeant York. And you do wonder about our military now. Is it so technology-based that some drone is going to be elected president someday? But anyway, the severing of the military and politics, we talk about, we really wonder, is McCain the last figure who will get elected on the basis of something he did in the military. And by the way, what he did was lose. Suffered. Didn't. Anyway, the rejection of MacArthur is an interesting moment in American political history. So the severing of military and politics is very good in certain ways, but maybe doesn't portend well for great men in the traditional sense. Anyway, it's a very complicated issue. I will say I'm not seeing a lot of great people around. Yes, you've been.
An example that was always being held up for a while was David Petraeus.
Yeah.
And I remember there was always, whenever a presidential election was coming, I think it was in 2008, the question was, will Petraeus run?
Yeah.
So, pre-scandal, it was very much the feeling, I guess, he was,
Yeah.
he would fill that.
Yeah.
But I guess in the international, we could make this more international.
Yeah.
Of great men.
Yeah.
Maybe not great in a Republican or greatness in virtue, but greatness in more Machiavellian sense in acquiring and keeping rule. This is Putin par excellence. Putin is the great man. I mean, it's not necessarily a desirable form of rule, but
Yeah.
he immediately comes to mind.
Yeah. I had dinner in a Russian restaurant on Sunday, and they were showing us the gluten-free elements on the menu, and I asked if they had any Putin-free elements on the menu, because he's kind of thuggish, actually, and he has proved to be very skilled politically in a low-minded sense. I mean, he's not a man of vision, and I don't think he's helping Russia. So anyway, but if put the last three great, if I had great figures in world history to me, would be Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and Pope John Paul II. And I think they did together change the world, namely orchestrate the fall of communism. And I think they really did it in much more conscious ways than we realize. Who would have thunk it? A grocer's daughter, a Polish actor, and an American actor. Anyway,
I want to go back to a question you asked us before the break.
Yeah.
You showed us, I think, a lot of support for fishing for this in the text.
yeah.
But nonetheless, does this world of Antony and Cleopatra now require a universal God?
Does it require it? I don't know. It's calling for it. Someone at one point says gods and goddesses, the whole synod of them. Again, I'm thinking of the logic that Constantine eventually followed, that it really was very convenient when you had a universal empire to get a universal God. It's kind of inconvenient to have all these little gods around, and it certainly was inconvenient for the emperor. So I'll put it. I believe the logic of a universal empire dictates a universal God.
I'm wondering also if there's a way in which, at the tail end of the way you answered Mr. Nathan's question of reminding us of the cycle of regimes in the Republic,
Wow.
that there's also something of an uncorrupted regime behind this possibly corruptible regime. If it somehow suggests that it is tied to this uncorruptible regime elsewhere, lends itself more credence.
What does that mean?
A kingdom in heaven that is not subject.
Oh, okay. I mean, I don't think that's Shakespeare's view of it. I don't think there's such a thing as an uncorruptible regime. We've never seen one, and I really don't think we ever will. And we like to fantasize, United States, we've got the uncorruptible regime. It's so saturated with corruption at every possible level. You got to face the facts. And so I think, to me, the fundamental tragic fact in Shakespeare is that politics is necessary, but a necessary evil, and is always corruptible. That is, he is not apolitical or anti-political, because he realizes, You need politics. It shapes human beings. You cannot simply abandon it. To abandon it is to abandon it to criminals. It's got enough criminals as it is, but we need politics. It's a central factor of human existence. Nevertheless, there's no such thing as a perfect politics. There's no such thing as a perfect politician. We're not going to get a philosopher king. The Tempest is all about that. And so we're faced with the fact that we need politics. It's an inevitable fact of human life, and yet it's one of the more corrupting facts of human life. And politics itself is corrupting. That's what Shakespeare shows. To participate in it, in some ways, is to sell your soul. And he shows that in king after king, even in Henry V. Even Henry V, the best king Shakespeare offers, kills his friend Falstaff, who's modeled on Socrates, by the way. It's one reason why the world is unendingly tragic for Shakespeare. So that fundamental tragic, and let's not forget this guy wrote tragedies, and so there's not some uncorruptible thing behind it all from his point of view, as I understand Shakespeare. Yes.
We've been kind of dancing around this question, so I think I'll put it forward. You mentioned this conference you went to on Monday, going to before.
Yeah.
So, are we Rome? Are we Shakespeare's Rome? So, where?
I talked about that at that conference, and I think, yes, I think there are very sobering lessons that can be read from Shakespeare's Roman plays about what we stand, where we stand. And the way I put it there, and I will repeat it here, that what you see in Rome is that ultimately its foreign policy corrupted its domestic policy. And that, again, this curious fact, the Republic built the empire, and then Rome ended up with an imperial regime. And I believe that our imperial adventures around the world now have corrupted our regime, and we have an imperial presidency because we're running an empire. Now, it's not as openly an empire as the Roman Empire, but when we tell the Ecuadorian president that his plane can't land in Paris because we think Edward Snowden's on it, that's an empire. That's claiming that we're ruling the whole world. And it was read as such in Latin America, which is very sensitive to the issue of American empire. So I think we're doing a lot in the world that then demands the loss of liberty in this country. And again, all these NSA revelations are an illustration of that.
So would you, if you could choose to go down further that path, and like we know Charles Krauthammer,
Yeah.
he said, we have to somehow embrace the obligations of this.
Yeah.
Or would you?
I disagree with that.
So you-
Yeah. I believe much more in liberty than I do in empire and power, but that would make me the odd man out here. But I really think we've sold the soul of our regime for the sake of power, and we will live to regret it. Yes.
Just going back to Antony and Cleopatra, there's a lot of images of women going to war.
Yeah.
And losing. Also, do
Yeah.
you think that that's like a historical basis, or is it just concern with Elizabeth on the throne, or is it just?
Well, that's a really interesting question, and people don't fully appreciate the significance of the fact that the English had a queen during this whole period, and she was a remarkable ruler, one of the greatest monarchs England has ever had, and an unbelievably shrewd ruler. It helped that she had this guy Burleigh, who was her essentially a prime minister. But it did set real limits to what she could do, because she could not lead troops in battle, and that was, unusual for a monarch. and it did set limits, and she spent her whole life jockeying with these various men, like Essex and Raleigh, and both using them and then dumping them and so on. So it isn't, you can't help but think it's behind a number of these plays. And of course, famously, the Earl of Essex did have Richard II stage, and Elizabeth said, "I am that Richard." So she was very sensitive to these parallels. And on the other side of it, you have all these plays that celebrate powerful women. I mean, I mentioned Spenser's Faerie Queen. That has a knight called Britomart, who's a woman who's a great knight. There's a hilarious play, the great Elizabethan Jacobean pirate play. It's called Fair Maid of the West, and her name is Bess, and she rules a pirate ship, and she defeats the Muslims, and it just and that went over great with the Elizabethan audience. So yes, I think there's a kind of reference going on, and Shakespeare is aware of the problematics of the situation there. Yes.
I wanted to go back to Charlie's question. There's in Machiavelli's Treatment of Rome, there's sort of an implication that the Republic basically can either be the Spartan model or it can be the Empire model.
Yeah.
The Spartan model is somehow perpetually under threat, and so there's a way in which republics are not necessarily forced to become empires, but that there's a very strong push towards it. I'm just wondering, like, if you have a figure like Coriolanus, if you have great men in the Republic, is it the case that there will be a movement towards empire just because if they want glory, military glory, they're going to expand the Republic? And that it's curious because obviously there's military glory in Sparta and things expand, but if that's just sort of it.
Well, in response to Athens, they in effect had to create their own little empire, their own league. I mean, these are very difficult questions because in some ways you don't choose whether to have an empire or not. The greatest empires of the world have occurred by accident. The Roman, the British, and the American. And in each case, you had people cautioning against empire. People like Cato the Elder. Again, many people argued against the British Empire. Cobden and Bright, the great parliamentarians, the great supporters of free trade. John Bright resigned from Gladstone's cabinet when Gladstone had gunboats shell Alexandria in disgust and in protest against the imperialist policy of the liberal prime minister. The British acquired their empire by accident. We have acquired an empire by accident. In each case, you respond to threats or perceived threats. You ask me, like many people, I would caution against that. And I would certainly prefer retreating from our world commitments to pursuing and expanding them, because I think it's the end of American freedom if we pursue things any further. And we're just seeing it in every way. We're moving towards a police state in this country, in my opinion.
But one could see the problem in Europe, which has receded from empire. So it's not as if the trend, to take this seriously, which is amazing. The current trend is not isolated to America. It is a problem of one might consider it as a problem of the West if one sees this as a problem.
Yeah, it flows from all the imperial aspirations of Europe, Germany and France, and many of their problems flow from that. In my view, imperialism is the curse of humanity. The great mistake to think that you must conquer a country to profit from it. I'm with Cobden and Bright and the free trade people. The anyway, but that's a huge story, and that takes us well beyond Shakespeare.
Thinking about the nature of this imperialism and Antony and Cleopatra, I found it really interesting when you were saying that the problem with imperialism in this particular book, or in this play, is that when Rome came into Egypt, they adopted too much of it.
Yeah.
They became too much like the Egyptians.
Yeah.
And I had actually come to the opposite conclusion.
Yeah, I read your
reading
paper. Yeah.
the book.
Yeah. And you want to make an argument for that?
Well, it seemed to me that instead of becoming more open to other ways of thinking, they tried to define Egypt in their own terms, as shown in the crocodile dialogue. What manner of a thing is your crocodile?
Yeah.
It's as wide as it has width.
Yeah.
That's what it does. It moves in the way that it moves. And it
But-
shows this lack of ability to define things in the way that.
Well,
makes sense to
I'll
us.
say that's a very contemporary view that worries about multiculturalism. Do the Romans fully understand the Egyptians? And the answer, of course, is no. But they do hold an Alexandrian feast. They dance the Egyptian bacchanals. Antony gets up there with the goddess Isis. I mean, these are not trivial. And that's what I mean when I say that they really are Egyptianized. Now, again, historically, this is true. Cestius's pyramid in downtown Rome, a massive turning out of Egyptian artifacts in Roman factories. There was a cult of Isis in Rome, then the cult of Mithras in Rome, which isn't Egyptian but is Middle Eastern. And Rome really was transformed by its encounter with the East. First Hellenized, then Egyptianized, then Mithraized, then Christianized. And you may say at every step of the way, well, I didn't fully understand it. But when we're talking about, people, we're not talking about professors of Egyptology. We're talking about whether the people behave a different way and adopt foreign lifestyles. And I think, the way of life that the Romans have adopted in Antony and Cleopatra is very remote from the way of life we see in Coriolanus, and is very close to what, in practical terms, we see in Egypt. They're not standing around getting massively drunk in Coriolanus, but they are in Antony and Cleopatra. So,
But isn't cultural exchange sort of inevitable regardless of whether or not there is empire? So you look at the globalization right now.
Yeah.
President McDonald's in every capital city of every developing country.
Yeah.
Why do you go to China? I have international student friends who party as much as American students, and I was shocked by it because East Asian cultures tend to be more austere, but that's changing. And it doesn't necessarily require
teenagers all over the world, alas, now look like Americans.
Yeah.
It's no, I mean, there's a certain irony here that Cato points to, that Rome militarily conquered Greece and got Greekified. It militarily conquered Egypt and got Egyptianized and ultimately Christianized. And there is a lesson there, I think, that military force does not prevail. And I think we might learn something from that, what America positively contributes to the world is The Simpsons. That is, in fact, its popular culture is conquering the world, and I think that's actually a good thing. And it just shows you can exert influence without exerting military influence. And maybe anyway, that's my economic, free trade, libertarian view of things, and that ironically, we're really prevailing where it counts, namely culturally. And for example, I have no fear of China. Like I always put, when I hear someone say, "Oh, I just bought a Chinese car. I'm so proud of my new Chinese car," I'll start to worry. But you know, culturally, we're not watching their television, and they're desperately trying to stop their people from watching our television, and stop them from watching our movies, because America is most powerful where it counts. Culturally, in all the things of the future, software, cyberspace, that's where we're powerful. And where a country like China, they're just trying to steal that stuff from us. So again, I think personally, and I'm not supposed to say this, but I think we're obsessed with military strength, and that obsession with military strength is corrupting this country. And we're militarizing everything. We got local police forces that are more military than many countries, have bigger militaries than many countries, and that frightens me. Drones being used domestically frightens me. I'm much more worried about that than anything coming out of China. China can't get a drone to me, but the Charlottesville police may. Anyway.
And yet you see in other countries that share some elements of our values, and that not completely, such as India or Turkey,
Yeah.
where they are developing kind of resources or soft power, which is, I think Turkish
Yeah.
soap operas are seen throughout the Middle East,
Yeah.
even in the Balkans, and Bollywood is seen
Yeah, but-
around the world. So
yeah.
Curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, again, our problem is that we apply military concepts to soft power. And to me, we don't need the battle of Bollywood versus Hollywood. There's room in the world for both of them. And it's not like Bollywood is going to exterminate Hollywood, because if you've ever seen a Bollywood film, you know, it's let the Indians enjoy them and the people in Turkmenistan or whatever, Tajikistan, but I don't feel threatened by a Bollywood musical. And again, it's just I think we're obsessed with wars, with everything is a war, and it's a zero-sum game. And I don't think culture is a zero-sum game, and I know that economics is not a zero-sum game. So I lean away from war. Now again, we're sometimes threatened with war. We can't ignore it.
So is the view in these three plays, though, that everything is war?
I should say I really feel I'm getting away from Shakespeare here. Shakespeare sees war as an absolutely central aspect of human life, and he loves warriors. I will say much more than I do. Well, I like General Patton as much as the next guy, but yes, and Shakespeare lived in a world in which war was pandemic, and in which they'd almost been annihilated in 1589 by the Spanish Armada. So yes, I think he takes war as more central to human life than I do. I think, it's not the only virtue, but the warrior virtue looms very prominently in Shakespeare's view of the world. But even he is worried about the limits of the warrior virtue, first of all, because Coriolanus is a very limited human being, in some ways a one-dimensional human being, and he is concerned about the life of warfare. I mean, a lot of people like to think of him as a pacifist because they're pacifists, and he's not. He really does celebrate war and sees it as a very central activity, but even he worries about what the life of warfare does to the larger community. How
Even Cleopatra's treatment of Antony, though. He's sad, telling him to dance. He's happy.
Yeah.
This even has a certain strategy about it that seems. I don't want to say it's straight away war.
Yeah.
Julian Sword.
Well,
Some of it feels less like something peaceable.
Yeah, which is but let's as I learned in the Book of Mormon Wednesday night, that's a metaphor. After all the teachings about going to Salt Lake City, they learned Salt Lake City is a metaphor for it. So let's remember sometimes these are just metaphors, and we got to beware of converting them into something other than metaphors. Yes.
I read the most of the week. I was very persuaded by your argument about these two plays looking at the master Jews, and I was wondering why you think in plays like Midsummer Night's Dream that are set in Athens but have this black world, green world kind of
Yeah.
position, why the regime there doesn't really seem to matter.
I think the regime doesn't matter in comedies. With the exception of Merchant of Venice, Shakespeare's comedies are set in kinds of never lands. And the whole reason they can end comically is that they're not set in real cities. And indeed, it's arguable, even in the case of Merchant of Venice, they got to get out of Venice to have a happy ending. I do believe, I was saying, Shakespeare finds the world of politics perennially tragic. And politics is a world where you have to make tough and nasty choices. And so in his tragedies, he tends to set them in real world places. His comedies really are set in utopias where you abstract from the political problems, where the issue is just love. And love is resolvable in a way that politics isn't. Because what Shakespeare shows, if you can get over this Petrarchanism and then notice there's a perfect love, love becomes negotiable in the comedies. Typically there's a comic ending because someone realizes I'm going to have to settle for a different woman. And we don't like to think this. We all live the life of Romeo and Juliet, but most of us in life settle when it comes to romantic matters for something that's other than infinite and perfect and absolute. And that's the world of Shakespeare's comedies. And the way I like to put it, it's very interesting in Merchant of Venice. One reason that is such a strange play which borders on tragedy is that Shylock cannot give up Judaism and be Shylock, whereas Gratiano could give up Portia and marry Nerissa and still be Gratiano. And that's what happened. Shakespeare's plays about romantic comedies about conversion and love. And almost always they convert from one woman to another. You gotta learn that. But religious conversion, he came to understand, is not so easily resolvable. So, it's interesting. In Merchant of Venice, he set a comedy in a real world with really big issues like religion and found it very hard to get out of that. And it's amazing what he has to do at the end of that play, leave Shylock out in Act 4, transfer the scene to Belmont, and so on. So the comedies are not set in the real world in the way the tragedies are. I think we've come to the end here, so let's stop on that happy note there. Well, you've been a great group. I've enjoyed reading your papers and even more enjoyed your discussion, and I learned a lot. I got a lot of notes here, and I hope you will continue to study Shakespeare.